You're now experiencing data with Brian O'Neill. Experiencing Data explores how product managers, analytics leaders, data scientists, and executives are looking at design and user experience as a way to make their custom enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. And now, here's your host, the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics, Brian O'Neill.
My guest today is Dinu Ajikutira, who's from Cibo Technologies, CIBO. And he is a senior director of product management and marketing. And he's going to be talking to us today about AgTech, agricultural technology, and specifically their platform that's a simulation and modeling tool. It's a decision support tool to help people working in the farming space understand the crops and the yields that different pieces of land can produce. And this is really fascinating. There's a lot of different stakeholders involved in the AgTech space, whether you're on the insurance side, the banking side, or actually farming products, CPG, or the actual farmers themselves. And so Dino is going to talk a little bit about his process for going about productizing these analytics and the data that they have in this space to help people working in farming. So I hope you enjoy my chat with Dino. So welcome back to Experiencing Data. Today, we're going to be talking with Dinu Ajikutira, who is currently at Cibo Technologies. And we're going to talk about farming and plants and agronomy and ag tech. Is that what it's called these days as I know it, ag tech?
Yeah, ag tech is a big buzzword these days, for sure.
Yeah, I'm totally stoked on this because I'm actually I live here in Cambridge, Mass, and I've got a vegetable garden in my background in my backyard. I definitely don't have any farming in my background that I know of, but I actually love growing vegetables and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, this is neat. There's data analytics, we got AI, and we have vegetables and food. And so this is some good stuff. And it sounds like you guys are doing some cool things at Cibo with simulation. Can you tell us a bit about what Cibo Tech does and what its software products are doing to help in the ag tech space?
All right. So first of all, Cibo stands for food in Italian. And the company was built on a mission of enabling sustainable agriculture. And we built this software platform, the technology platform that brings weather, soil, topography, and agronomic practices in combination with simulation to actually digitally grow the plant. And that allows us to explain to the users why something occurs, what if something different had happened, and predict the outcomes of how plants will perform in different environments.
Got it. And your role there, you're in product management, correct? You're a senior director of product management. So you're working on the actual interfaces and data products that are used by the people that purchase the software, I assume, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I run the product management group. I create software products that meet market needs, what the market needs. Yeah.
Got it. So can you tell me about who purchases the software, and is that the same person that will actually log into, I guess is it a web-based tool or something like that, I assume, like a SaaS?
Yeah, it's SaaS. It's a web-based tool. Once we authenticate a user, they could log in and test it out. We are at a beta phase right now, so we are not commercial yet.
Okay.
And typically, like the buyers and the users are different personas, right? The decision makers are managing P&Ls, but the users, in the case of Cibo, are the last mile providers for farmers. So these could be agronomists or CPG companies potentially, or anybody who's actually serving the farmer.
Got it. So can you walk us through, like, if I was in CPG or if I was an agronomist, what is my problem that makes me wake up one day and say, I need to get a demo of Cibo Technologies stuff? What is the problem there? And what is it that I'm going to want to sit down and do the next morning or whenever my subscription is enabled? Tell me about some of those use cases that you might go through.
Okay, let me try, because there are various groups of industries, right, that are helping farmers do better. And the bottom line is helping farmers make more money in a sustainable way. So there are agronomists, there are retailers retailing seeds or fertilizers. There are insurance companies that are insuring crops. There are bankers who are loaning to purchase land, rent land, or operate land. So there are different groups of individuals that are interacting with the farmers. with the expectation of improving the outcome for the farmer. So let's take an example of an agronomist. Agronomists are typically making recommendations of farming practices to get the best outcome from that land. And the biggest variable that happens in any field is the weather. Next year's weather is not going to be, at least likely not going to be, something we have observed in any of the years in the last 5 or 10 years. So that's the kind of challenge, is what do you expect and how do you respond to it in a meaningful way to bring back the productivity in the back on track. And that's a difficult deal. There's a saying that you have 40 chances in farming, and that means to say that a farmer has 40 years of farming, and he learns every year. And every year, that's the only chance he gets to get productivity. But with technology, Sibo can help them make it 40,000. Try your hypothesis of what you want to do before you actually do it on the farm. There's a reason why we use dummies to do crash tests in cars. And it's something similar to that. You don't want to take the risk in the real thing. So agronomists, the pain point for them is whether their recommendations are going to be the right one that actually produces the results or not. Using technology can prove it out before they recommend to the farmers. These are the kind of things that people typically worry about.
Got it. And so are these agronomists working as like consultants to the farmers, and it's like they're like a service organization, and so this is a tool that they would use to improve the recommendations they provide to farmers? Or like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, first thing there, Brian, is when it comes to farming, there is no standard practice. That's the challenge of agriculture. There is no certainty. In the past years that I worked on simulation and modeling for other industries like process industry, pulp and paper, airlines, building, it's all physical systems where you control everything. In agriculture, environment is something we don't control. And farming practices is done by the gut. The first thing I want to correct right off there is no standard practice. And if you can repeat the question back, I kind of lost track of what you precisely asked, and I can get back to answering.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess what I was thinking about, so it sounds like, let's say in the pre-SIBO way, in the being able to do modeling or running the simulations, you had scientists, these agronomists that provided advice or recommendations to farmers on how to improve crop yield. That's basically what this comes down to, correct? What plants, maybe how to plant them or where to plant them, what's going to yield the best based on whatever inputs and information they had. And then the farmer decides how much they want to trust that or use their gut. And so your tool actually puts some science against this. It actually runs some of those simulations and allows them to provide better insights. So my question was, is it the farmer who's, I realize the farmer is probably eventually going to benefit the most. And then of course the insurance company or whoever, all the other second order factors that happen afterwards. But is the farmer sitting down and actually using this software, or is it the agronomist? And then if it's the agronomist, do they act as like consultants to farmers? I don't know how that works. And they look at this as like a better tool in their toolbox for their consulting work, or how does that like, who would actually sit down and use the SIBO tech directly?
Right. Okay. All right. So with an example, okay, so I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's say the agronomists are typically in independent agronomist organizations. They belong to some groups that consult with farmers. Mm-hmm. Large farmers hire their own agronomists to look after large farmlands that they own. There are also agronomists in large companies that provide agronomic services. These could be companies that are positioning themselves to serve the farmers in all the different aspects that they need to deal with. And our technologies will be a toolkit in ensuring that they make better decisions in their recommendations. So let's say an agronomic services company develops business plans for farmers. This will be one of the insights that will be inserted into that business plan on how they need to operate their farms as they respond to different weather events, etc. Another possible user or users would be in the insurance companies or the bankers. In the case of the insurance, they are possibly looking at how do you ensure a particular level of crop outcomes from the land. Is it 190 bushels per acre is what they're willing to insure at? Will they give a premium for 200 bushels per acre? That's the kind of decisions they are making at the start of the planning season. which is around now. The bankers, on the other hand, are also looking at the risk profile of the farmland to say, do I loan? How much money should I loan to this farmer based on the outcome they want to expect from that piece of land, from standard practices that the farmer has been executing on? There are risks associated with each of these decisions. So the insurance agent or the banker might be looking at what is the risk tolerance for that particular piece of land they're willing to accept to give a particular rate to the farmer. And our technology can help them determine that based on our prediction tools.
It sounds potentially, from a user experience standpoint, it sounds particularly a little bit challenging. Do you serve up the same experience and the same tool set for someone that has a financial interest? I mean, I understand everyone has a financial interest, but I would imagine that as you were talking about calculating a risk profile or something like that, the final information and the evidence you might provide to support the conclusions the software makes, I could see that experience differing for what a farmer wants to see versus what the insurer wants to see, right? They're looking for safety in their investment. What is my risk of losing, of this farm not performing well? But I imagine they don't care as much about which version of corn, which seed, whatever do we use. I mean, I know that stuff's constantly changing, but they probably don't care quite as much about that detail it the same way, do they? I mean, can you talk about a little bit about, are they different products, or is it one product and you have to design carefully around all these different use cases that are here?
Well, first of all, let me qualify all my responses. We are at a beta stage, right? So our users are still testing, and some of the things I'm saying, there are no real users who are using it today to make decisions. Our product and technologies are capable of making these decisions.
I see. You're still productizing it kind of at this point.
Right. Got it. So we're a startup. We've been in stealth mode for a while. We've built the technology. We can prove it to anyone who wants to see it.
I see.
And we have business going on. We are paying customers, but largely much of the customer base that I talk about are still in the beta phase.
Got it. And are those, if you can't say I totally understand, are those more on the finance side or the farming side or the science side? And how do you go about testing that, making a good product, a good data product out of this technology that you have?
We have to test. So the challenge with agriculture, well, there are two challenges in what I've observed. One is this area is incredibly interesting, and that is a problem. It's interesting because you get digressed. And as a product leader or a product manager, the primary skill you bring to the table is focus. Mm-hmm. You need to understand precisely what you want to get done. You want to always communicate in writing what you are going to get done and ensure that you're getting that done in a timely way. And that is particularly challenging in ag tech. Mm. Secondly, the maturity of ag industry to technology is in its early stage. And it's at an early stage at a time when there is a lot of noise around AI and machine learning and data analytics. And that makes it very complicated because you don't know what technology really does what they claim to do. And it's a community of potential users that are not used to using high-tech technology to solving their problems.
Sure.
If you look at, so now remind me again, Brian, you were asking me about specific users and how they use it and how do we determine that it's usable, correct?
Yeah, I was curious. I guess I didn't understand initially where you guys were in your product lifecycle. So it sounds like you're still kind of figuring out what the product is based on these different problem sets that exist in the market. So how do you go about testing your ideas? Are you doing formal experience testing, or is it just conversations? How will you validate that the product itself is on the right track for these different constituents you have? Do you have a process you follow?
Yes, we do. We have a large base of scientists in the company. Mm-hmm. If you think about our target industries, right, there are going to be optimizing farmland and farmland purchase and rentals. There is a part of optimizing operations of the farm, and then optimizing the supply chain around the farm. Mm-hmm. Those are the three pieces. Now, We have in the company crop scientists and agronomists that act as internal users for the agronomist use case or the scientist use case in terms of ag input companies, etc.
Mm-hmm.
We also have tie-ups with large farm groups around the country who help us by testing our software and informing us about some of their pain points and use cases. We conduct alpha tests and beta tests with literally field agronomists going to farmers face to face and getting them to use our software and test it out. Not because we want to necessarily sell the software to the farmers, but any company that is in the last mile to serve the farmer is going to come up with the answers that the farmer needs to respond to.
Mm-hmm.
So the best way we can do is to get the product and its solutions qualified by the farmer, which makes it most meaningful for the constituents that we want to cater to. So we have a whole bunch of different set of activities and programs that are designed to get different potential users to test out our software.
Got it. Can you tell me a little bit about what that experience is like, both for the farmer but also for your team? For example, this agronomist, I'm picturing a guy driving up in a truck with a tablet, and he's like, "Do you have Wi-Fi?" "Oh yeah, we have Wi-Fi." And he turns it on and he loads up your screen and he sits down and they're having coffee at a table somewhere in Kansas. And you guys are showing him well, we ran this with the, corn kernel A, for next season, and we got 86% whatever. And then we did B, and check this out. Like, we're seeing 98% blah, blah, blah. Here's what went into this. What do you think? I'm totally making this up. Can you tell me about what that experience is, especially because you're talking about this, new tech in a space where people aren't used to using data to make decisions here. Walk me through that experience. Help the listener picture what this experience is like and how your product might fit into that.
Sure. In fact, whatever you said didn't sound like a story you're making up. It can be quite real.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, we underestimate the tech use by the farmer. The average farmer in the United States, in my opinion, having done no studies on it, by the way, use a lot more technology than an average middle-aged person, in my opinion. Now, it's a crowded market. There's a lot of technology companies vying for the farmer's business. There's a lot of apps that the farmers could access, and they use a lot of technologies to make their decisions. Besides that, your question was specifically about, okay, how do you get around to actually interacting with this farmer, and how does that look in a typical day?
Yeah, I'm really curious how that feedback gets back to you or to your team to be properly prioritized. Are you guys sending any Cibo employees out to observe these interactions and right from the horse's mouth, or is it mostly kind of like secondhand, like the agronomist would report what he heard from the farmer and then you guys interpret that? Or can you talk about that?
Sure. So it's all of the three, by the way.
Uh-huh.
We have agronomists, Cibo employees that actually go out to farmers.
I see.
We hear from different farmer communities having looked at our technologies by email or by conversations over the phone. But we, that is product managers, literally go to farmers and sit with them and work through the product to ensure that it's something that they believe is valuable.
Got it. And
the part that I wanted to touch on here is my own visit. I visited about 4 farmers in Kansas and Nebraska about 4 weeks ago. And this was, our field agronomist taking us to different farmers across a 1,000-mile journey in his truck. And it's, long roads. I've not been to that part of the country before, having not worked with the farming operations in the past. It's an exciting journey. And and I'll give you one of the stories that I heard. We went to this large farm. He's a large farmer, very successful farmer. And his strategy for growth is to expand his farmland and the farmland that he's able to operate, because that's where his value add is. He is very efficient in what he does. He's constantly looking for new farmland. The previous one that he had just rented, and he told us this, is about 30 miles north of where he currently farms, in majority of his fields are. And he felt that he could have done a little bit better due diligence before renting that farmland, because it's not quite panning out like the way it expected, and he suspects it's probably the soil that's not doing it for him, and he's not getting the kind of productivity that he was expecting when he rented.
Mm-hmm.
And recently he had a call from another farmer who wants to rent out his piece of land. So he was checking out our technology to see if this is something that would be meaningful for him. The first thing he does is he wants to get comfortable with, okay, what can you tell me about my field? Because I know my field, and if you can tell me what I already know, I can believe that you can tell me the same thing about a farm that I don't know about. And I can.
Interesting.
Okay, so he checks out his farm, and he looks at how his field looks in our solution, in our technology platform, and how the intrafield looks, how the stability looks. Do we identify the right zones as being the highest productivity zones, the low productivity zones, the unstable zones? And I can explain, if you want to get into it, what these mean. Then he finds out like how we predict how his field has performed, having known nothing about his field directly from him. But purely by the data we infer and our simulation models, we can tell him how it did in the last 10 years. And having convinced himself, now he is looking into the farmland that he wants to rent and understanding the same dynamics. And because ours is a simulation model, now we can change some parameters to say, look, I don't plant at that density. I usually plant at a different density, or I plant a different hybrid. How would that normally perform? If I invested in irrigation, how would that perform? And these are the questions he typically wants to answer. And we help him do that by just observing him and saying, okay, you can do this with our software. How would you do it? And is it intuitive enough for you to get your answers? And by pure observation and recording, we can come back and get an improvement, and then perhaps go back to him and say, can you test this out for us if you don't mind? And we need to time it really well with the farmers, by the way, because probably we have another week or so. Once they start planting, they don't have the time for this kind of stuff. So you got to get them in the right time when they have the time to pay attention to you. And once the farming operations begin, the farmer gets really, really busy, and he can't pay attention to anything else.
There's so much here. My brain's on fire thinking about how this relates to so many other, analytics and data products.
You're listening to Experiencing Data, the podcast that explores how design and user experience make enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. Your host is Brian O'Neill of Designing for Analytics, designer, UX consultant, and advisor to the business leaders behind custom enterprise data products and analytics applications. For more information, visit designingforanalytics.com. If you're enjoying the show, help Brian out by rating it on iTunes. And now, back to Brian.
So one thing you talked about here is there's clear seasonality here, literally the word season, right? When we talk about farming, but so much of the time I feel like, data products are not always designed with a sense that, they're just always on, right? A web tool is just log in at any time and it's there. But people aren't always thinking about, well, when is the right time to provide X, Y data to someone, some piece of insight? What are they doing in June that's different that they're doing in September? Obviously, a farmer, when you're in harvest mode, you're in a very different mode than you are in planting mode. And so just being aware of that and you can't be aware of that if you don't get out there and talk to your customers and start to learn about what their life is like. And this gets to empathy. So I love that you guys are literally doing a ride along, which we call in design world, we call these ride alongs sometimes. And you're literally in a truck and visiting these farmers to understand this. So the other thing too was the demo you talked about. You could see how this could become if your tool can explain to me what happened in the last 10 years, I'll start to believe the prediction. I think that's really powerful as well. It helps build trust that the technology it's not magic, that it's actually looking at data points and it's coming up with, with predictions I can believe, and I'm willing to put my trust a little bit more in the software versus my experience. And I think that can be hard, right? I'm sure your tool will probably come up with some surprising recommendations at times that might really push the envelope, right? Really, you want me to plant, eggplant, or you really want me to separate my crops to 2-foot spacing instead of 1 with this variety? Do you have any stories where, the tool might have come up with a prediction that was a little bit unusual and you hit that friction and the customer was a little bit, or your prospect or this participant you were talking to was a little bit, I'll believe it when I see it, or any anecdotes like that?
No, I don't have any anecdotes to that effect. But the couple of things, a couple of points I want to make. One is that the farmer knows his farm more than anyone else does. They have they've farmed in that piece of land, and they've tested it. There's a lot of generational knowledge that's gone into it. But here's what we can do. We can tell the farmer about a farm that they don't have knowledge about. They have not put their the boots on the ground on that particular piece of farm. That's where we come in and bring value, and we do it also in situations that the farmer has not encountered before, even in their own farm. There are situations they've not encountered in the past, and we can give them information about that. And that is the value of using technologies in their own farms. The thing about data, Brian, and how we think about it differently is that data is you can make a lot of sense out of data, but there are two critical aspects to that. One is you need to have all the data that you need, and agriculture is not exactly an area where all the sensors are where you need them to be. So there are a lot of the data is very sparse. There's a lot of gaps, and there's just not enough data for you to make the conclusions you need to make. And secondly, the past will not look like the future because of where we are in terms of climate change and the things that we're experiencing. So you cannot extrapolate, biological systems from past observations to a completely different weather or environmental situations. And that is where we can come in and say, we don't need all the data. We can supplement data that is missing using our simulation tools and be able to predict to weather outcomes that you have not experienced in the past.
Can you tell me a bit about the experience? So let's say I'm that farmer. I think he was in Nebraska, right? And you're saying that he bought some land that he hadn't used before, and it didn't quite perform as well as he had hoped. Or maybe he's looking for a new piece of land, and maybe he's trying to decide, should I go and rent or purchase this land? What is that experience you're going for? Like, is it load up Google Maps, put it in geo mode, get a picture of this area, and then I go into your tool and I run some modeling? And is this something that happens in real time? Is this a process that happens over many weeks? What's that experience like from the time when the farmer's like, I really think I should go in on this spot 30 miles north of home, but I want some reinforcement before I pull the trigger on it. Can you help us picture what that experience might be like, or what you're going for from their experience perspective?
Sure. From the user experience perspective, right?
Yeah.
They just come into our tool. There's a authentication system, either a username, password, or they hit on Google authentication and get into the tool. When they come into the tool, there is a map. The map is your central navigational tool. Now, there are several ways the farmer identifies his field or her field by just typing in the address or uploading what's called a shapefile, which is the coordinates of where the field is located. Latitude, longitude coordinates. And typically the farmer has shape files from different tools they've been using, so they can just upload it into our system. And immediately when they do that, and it's a matter of seconds, although sometimes the exportation of the shape files can take them some time, but if they have the address, it's the easiest way. They just get to the field, and after that, real time, we can show them their stability inside their fields, in terms of their, the elevations and the depressions and the high productivity areas and the low productivity areas, etc. And you click on simulation. We already have all the inferred data in their planting densities, the planting seeds, the relative maturity hybrids that they've used, whether they have irrigation or not, and they just hit run. It runs. It gives them the results. It's a chart for the last 10 years. Now they can play with it and say, okay, what if I had done something differently? And now, if they want to compare it to a different field, they could look for the second field, just add it to that portfolio, compare the two fields within the software platform, And all this thing they could do within 5 minutes. It's all in there.
So the shape file isn't just a map of coordinates of like what's planted where. It has additional data, and so when that's uploaded, you're getting additional data points that then go into the software and it's interpolated. Is that correct?
No, we don't get any data except where the field is. So all we need from the farmer is where is his field. And by the coordinates, I simply meant like, if you were to draw a geometry around a map, that geometry is identified by the coordinates of each point that connect the different lines. And that's all we need.
Wow. That's pretty fascinating. So I guess I could also draw a shape map over the land that I want to purchase or rent, correct?
Exactly.
And then you can do a, comparison. Like if I run the same crops and the same, I know a lot about cotton. I don't know anything about eggplant. So I'm going to run the simulation. Can I plant my cotton and bring my operations over there without making I assume they don't want to make dramatic changes to tools and, stuff that they know they want to stay in their own domain unless there's a big opportunity. Or maybe they do. Maybe they say, wow, I can't plant cotton there, but, it would be ripe for, whatever corn, something. Is that kind of the types of feedback you might be able to get?
It's possible. At this point in time, we only do corn.
Okay.
In the corn belt. So it's really about whether I want to irrigate, whether I want to plant more density of seeds, which part of the field should I plant more, which part of the field should I plant less, should I have irrigation, or is it not worth the money? Things that kind of decision. Which hybrid should I plant? We capture that by what we call relative maturity. Those kind of information is what we allow the interface to change. Well, let me frame this in a slightly broader way. Okay, there are a couple of things that the farmer is looking for. One is they're looking for expanding to new pieces of land. So they're looking for which parts of the land can be rented. But the farmers are also, and that's the way that the first one is a strategy to grow by growing your operations to larger areas of farmland. The second strategy for growth is for new crops or specialty crops or organic farming. That's operational efficiency method of growing. And we have been talking about farmers and focused on the farming outcomes. But I initially started off this conversation by saying Cboe is set up to actually serve the last mile providers for the farmers. So I still want to make the connection that, if the farmer likes what you're doing in terms of your technology, I think the last mile operators' interest will be served in terms of their use cases. Have you had any
and maybe you haven't gotten this far with it yet, but have you been doing these kind of ride-along style studies with the different personas? So not just the farmer, but say the insurance person as well. Have you been doing similar research on the product?
We've done some research, not as much as we have with the farmers, but some with, like I said, with agronomists. We have our own agronomists, and we work with other agronomists as well. We have done with ag input companies in terms of seed breeders or product marketers for new seeds. So there are a community of different potential users that we work with.
What are you finding difficult from a product management perspective? Like you talked about, focus is really important. What are some of the challenges that you have in figuring out what should go into this tool? And is one of those challenges is the same interface for everyone the right product, or is it really we need separate tools, separate products for each of these different personas? Even though they're all in the same ecosystem, they don't all need the same product. I don't want to feed challenges to you, but can you talk a little bit about what's difficult in figuring out how to design a good product for these different groups?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So there are different levels of subject matter expertise, if you will, of the end users, right? In the different verticals you might want to go after. And one of them, let's take an example of seed breeders. High, expertise in data analytics. They want to see a lot of data and make sense out of it. And the best way to serve that particular community, because they come with their own philosophies of how to make these decisions. And the kind of decisions they're trying to make is, where do I test a particular breed of seed? Where do I best sell a particular breed of seed where it's going to be most effective? And the way we approach that market is by providing APIs to them and not an interface at all. An API that accesses the full power of our data engine and our simulation engine, so they can access the data they need and do analytics on top of it to help them make the right decisions. At the same time, once you get to the last mile to the farmer group of companies, like insurance providers or bankers or retailers or agronomists, each persona has a different use case. And the UI or the UX is designed and purpose fit to allow them to get the value, the differential value for their current workflow, which is going to be different from the other vertical. That a retailer's use case is going to be different from an insurance provider's use case. They're basically looking at different aspects of farmland or farming operations. And the way you do that is by designing the software architecture in a way that a platform is able to communicate with the user interface layer through APIs. And now you can make your user experience a very modular user experience with the kind of dashboard that collectively gives the information that is most relevant to who you're serving. And you can custom fit the user experience to serve that particular purpose. So yeah, we just change it. Each user experience is going to look different depending on which target segment you're designing it for.
And will those be separate products, or they'll still be one product just with different modalities of use?
We don't know yet. Right now we have what we call two products.
Mm-hmm.
The one we call the Sibo Insights product, which is the application with one user interface. And the other is the Sibo API, which is for the subject matter experts in the ag input space.
Right. So in the original question, when we asked about what's difficult, are you saying that is it difficult to figure out whether or not they should be separate products? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's easy for us to figure out they should be separate products. What is difficult is the specific pain points you want to solve and how you expose that with a user experience that's intuitive.
Sure. Do you run the risk of too much data or too much of the raw information there, clouding the insights that in the value that you want to convey? Are you worried about that? Or more like the number of different things you can do with the tool type of a problem? What are those challenges like?
I think the primary worry is to touch on the real pains that people have, right? The hardest thing for when you explore market needs is to analyze the market objectively and not frame the conversation to lead to the conclusion that you want to get to, and truly understand what the current workflows are and what the pains are associated with the current workflows that you can provide a solution to, and what the differential or the delta value of that solution is going to be. That is a big challenge. The second one, of course, is what you said, is there is a lot of data and you want to purpose fit your user experience to provide the solution you're targeting so the insights are clear and actionable and not confuse it with noise.
Have you had any feedback that that's been the case so far? And you're like, oh, we changed, X, Y, and Z, report or whatever, for this farmer because we found out that, they didn't really need that information or it wasn't the right stuff at the right time. Are you like going through iterations and seeing these types of little learning outcomes?
Yeah, in fact, ours was a different, our approach was different. We exposed the minimal data that we thought was necessary. Mm-hmm. And we are actually going in the other direction, is to start exposing more data as we have more conversations. And I think we'll still hit the problem of, okay, now there's too much and we need to retract. But at some point, we have a tipping point. At this point in time, our experiment has been very sparse data, but not enough insights. Let's provide the, for example, okay, you can run the simulation. You can tell me the last 10 years how my field did. but I don't know what hybrid you used. Can you show it to me in a table? And when did I fertilize and how much? So suddenly now we have a table that actually shows that information. Very soon we'll have a situation where help me compare the different fields against each other with the parameters that I want to compare them against, not the parameters you've already used. And so maybe we'll develop a custom layer of how do you want to customize that comparison parameters and stuff like that. But at this point in time, we are going the other direction.
Yeah, this is actually something I love that you said this. Some of the talks I give at conferences, one of the points that needs to be made is that, and I think even Tufte likes to talk about this, but to add clarity, you need to add information sometimes. And the issue isn't always the quantity of the information, it's how it's designed. And I've seen this repeatedly where there are times when if you properly add information and design it well, you actually bring a lot more insight there. You could literally add 100 times, more information to a screen. Perhaps you give time series information in the form of some evidence to help back up the conclusion drawn by the software, and you actually provide more insight there. So this kind of removes stuff all the time. Well, not all the time. Sometimes you need to provide that evidence there. And I often talk about this pyramid, right? You have your conclusion at the top, which maybe is something as simple as a sentence. There's not even any data there. It's just a conclusion that the software interpolated, right? And then the next tier down might be that evidence layer. How did it go? What did we look at, right? What were the inputs? What are some of those factors? Why did we come up with the conclusion? Why this corn and not that corn? And then the level 3 stuff is more of the data, right? All the insights and the goodies there. And what I've seen over time, sometimes that happens is that over time, the user starts to trust if they've seen it and they can believe it and they can relate to it, they start not to need the level 3 stuff as much because you've given them level 2. And mostly it's about a level 1 with that level 2 is kind of the check to help them believe in what's there. And that's all about the design, right? It's all about how you design that experience such that they can believe these insights and get the value out of your analytics. So I love how you said you're actually started small and that now you're gradually adding to provide that level of believability and that's required.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more on that statement, Brian. In fact, we got to this point in the journey because we decided to separate the data-rich experience that a particular segment needs from the insight that the other segment is looking for. So we removed, we identified the ag input experts that are likely to use our software will need access to a lot more data. And the way we'll enable that is by APIs. And we'll reserve the app experience for specific workflows that are purpose fit for specific answers.
Right. No, I can see that.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny how you have to add sometimes to make things easier. A lot of times we all assume that we need to be subtractive in our methods, but we just have to be careful with how we design it if we're using, additive measures. So it's interesting. And it's something I think as people that work in data product space that we need to remember that sometimes the solution is going to be to add information. And if you're feeling like you have a clutter problem, if your customers are complaining about too much information, or that's a symptom usually that the design is wrong. It's not necessarily that data has no value. It may be the wrong data at the time they need it. They don't, say at harvest time or whatever, you don't need information about what seeds to plant. It's not wrong information. It's just not needed at this particular time. So usually those are design problems lurking there when people talk about quantity, whether it's too much or not enough. It's usually a design problem, I find. And then obviously there's a challenge of actually building out, especially when they want something you don't have, data that you don't have. That's always a challenge too. Are there any other particular challenge you guys are? This is really fascinating to kind of hear about these different use cases, but especially because you've got these different stakeholders with different lenses on the whole end-to-end workflow. But any other particular challenges you guys are having?
I think we covered most of the parts here, Brian. The one thing I want to leave you with is how interesting ag space is. And that's one of the challenges we need to solve is not necessarily to make it boring, but to keep the focus on the problems you want to solve.
Sure. It does sound like a really interesting product. I'm really curious about it, even though I'm not necessarily a farmer, but it sounds fascinating that can be done. That's, I think, one of the fun things about working on data products, right? Is like, there's so many different industries doing really creative things to solve problems for people. And I think it's fascinating that you guys, especially when you guys can do this without having, it sounds like you don't have a lot of data coming directly from the user, but they're able to get quite a bit of value out of the product because of how you've, aggregated data from other sources and put it to good use, and are providing experience around that can help them produce food and crops and things that we need. So
exactly.
Awesome. Well, I'm curious, do you have any other, this has been a great conversation. Do you have any closing thoughts for other people working on these data products and analytics tools that you might, some parting words?
I can't summarize that better than what we already had a conversation about, Brian. Sorry.
Cool. No, no, not at all. No, you've shared some good stuff here. So, and where can people find out about? Obviously, I'll put a link to Cibo Technologies. It's cibotechnologies.com. Are you on Twitter or LinkedIn? Is there a place people can kind of follow what you're doing in this space?
Yeah, for a guy who's working on technology, I am less tech friendly in that way. I only have a LinkedIn account.
Oh, okay.
But
that's all right.
It's a fairly active LinkedIn account, and I see you post a lot there, and I enjoy some of the blogs that you write up.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I will definitely put a link to Dinu's LinkedIn page, and I appreciate you coming on the show. So this is, again, Dinu Adjikutira from Cibo Technologies in product management, talking about ag tech. So this has been great. Thanks again for coming on Experiencing Data and sharing some of your insights.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Yeah, take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Experiencing Data with Brian O'Neill. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it with the hashtag #ExperiencingData. To get future podcast updates or to subscribe to Brian's mailing list, where he shares his insights on designing valuable enterprise data products and applications, visit designingforanalytics.com/podcast.